Hey guys, I'm Andrew Luke, and welcome to High Score. This is a series where I pick out a game and we take a quick look at the music. For this first episode, I figured I'd start with a classic. The original Legend of Zelda launched in 1986 for the Japanese Famicom, and later in 1987 for the Nintendo Entertainment System. It was developed by Shigeru Miyamoto and Takashi Tezuka, both who have gone on to become prominent figures in the success of Nintendo. The Legend of Zelda has a pretty straightforward story. Ganon has stolen the Triforce of Power and kidnapped Princess Zelda. Now Link must travel through the Kingdom of Hyrule to collect the pieces of the Triforce of Wisdom in order to save Zelda and Hyrule from Ganon's grasp. So, a simple fantasy story really doesn't mean much today, but in the late 1980s, this was huge for the gaming industry. This is one of the first games many gamers in the 80s played that truly made them feel like they were on a grand, epic adventure. So, where does the music come into play? The music of a game, like the music to a film or to a TV show, is designed to enhance the game to its fullest extent. Or at least that's what the goal is. To dive deeper into the music, there's three aspects that I want to cover in this video. First, let's start with the composer. The composer for The Legend of Zelda is one of the most popular and arguably one of the most important composers in the industry, Koji Kondo. Before he became a successful composer, he was just an ordinary college student. When Nintendo started planning to expand more into the arcade industry, they sent out recruitment letters to the Osaka University of the Arts, where Kondo was studying. He was the third person hired to create music and sound effects, alongside his colleagues Chip Tanaka and Yukio Kanaoka. However, he was the first one at Nintendo to specialize in music composition. He started taking lessons on the electric organ when he was 5 years old, and occasionally he performed with some local bands, but he never saw himself dedicated to music. As the team worked on The Legend of Zelda, Kondo wanted the main theme to be an arrangement of a very famous classical piece by Maurice Ravel called Bolero. However, when the game was almost finished, they were not able to get the rights to use it. With the team in a panic, Kondo had to take one for the team by powering through an all-nighter just to compose the theme for The Legend of Zelda. This was extremely interesting to me, and even inspiring to me as someone who loves composing. Except when I write a piece in one night, it usually ends up being complete trash. That aside, I now want to take a closer look at the music. Now that we know some cool things about the composer, I want to listen to both Bolero and the Zelda Overworld theme to see if we can find any similarities. If Kondo spent months arranging Bolero to work in the contents of Zelda, there has to be similarities between the two. First, let's listen to a little bit of Bolero. Now, some of you may be thinking, this doesn't sound like Zelda at all. But before we draw to a conclusion, let's take a listen to the classic 8-bit theme that we all know and love. Okay. They do sound different from each other. Both of them have contrasting melodies that don't really sound anything alike. Bolero's melody tends to center around two notes, and it flows fluidly between the two without very much variety. What makes Bolero so popular comes from the melody hopping around between different instruments and having more players join in. So by the end of the piece, it ends up sounding like this. So the point I'm trying to get at is Bolero's melody doesn't do very much musically to keep itself interesting. The support of the instruments and the orchestration is what makes the piece ultimately stand out. Meanwhile, Zelda's melody is more dynamic melodically and rhythmically. You can spot this with the melody itself. It's not afraid to go towards a higher register, which ultimately does create a more interesting melody. Seeing the musical journey of how it goes from the B-flat here to the B-flat one octave higher, then it starts centering around the F, the fifth of the Mixolydian flat 6 scale. I know that's a lot of music terminology, so I'm going to condense it to layman's terms. The B-flat is the home plate in this example. Oh crap, now we're using baseball terminology. Oh well, I'm gonna roll with it. Okay, so when you look at the field, you start at home, and your goal is to make it around the field, hitting all the bases, and eventually making it back home. So let's pretend the B-flat is home, and F is second base. You start making your musical journey, but now we're all of a sudden focusing on the F later in the melody. Basically, shortstop is over here making it hell for you to try to get to the next base, to keep you from moving on your musical journey. The melody starts off familiar as you're on your journey, then it starts becoming unfamiliar with unexpected danger, but then it eventually comes back with you making it to home plate before repeating it all again. The last thing I want to get to is if there's any similarities between the overworld theme and Bolero. There is one key theme that I believe played a role in Kondo's influence. It all comes down to the rhythm of these pieces. Both pieces repeat the same rhythm throughout the piece without any changes. Here's the Bolero rhythm, and these two bottom lines are for the Zelda rhythm. Both of these pieces share the similarities of switching back and forth between the 8th notes, the 16th notes, and the triplets. While it's not completely the same, the Zelda rhythm is almost a simplified version of the Bolero rhythm, and it makes sense. With Bolero being planned to be the overall theme for months, I don't doubt that some of the same musical ideas were in Kondo's head when he was chugging his mocha at 4 in the morning. Now, I want to wrap this all up with one last thing, what I like to call the impact. Now that we have some knowledge of the composer and the music, I want to ask the question, how does it affect the game? Would the success of Zelda be any different if we had Bolero as our main theme? I think Zelda would have been financially successful no matter what. It was just a groundbreaking game for its time. However, I don't think the franchise would have carried on so well if it wasn't for Kondo's work. You see, Ravel didn't write Bolero to be an orchestrated piece. It was originally meant to be a ballet. In fact, the name Bolero derives from a Latin dance that was popular in Spain and Cuba. From the very beginning, it was designed to be for a performance art that's graceful and extravagant. Having that for a fantasy adventure filled with strange monsters, enemies around every corner, mystical weapons and beasts, I don't think it's the most fitting. The fact there were copyright issues, I think, was a blessing in disguise. It allowed Kondo to hone his musical talents and create a theme that reflects the adventure of an open world. While Zelda would have probably sold well with different music, it wouldn't have the longevity to keep the fans coming back to it all these years later. I'm not a neuroscientist, but there is believed to be a connection between music and our own personal memories. There's evidence of patients with Alzheimer's who were given music that they loved during their youth. Once they listened to it, they briefly remembered who they were and different things they have long forgotten. That goes to show how extremely powerful music can be for anything. I argue if the Zelda theme had been anything other than what we've gotten, the fanbase wouldn't have remained this strong across the decades of games. There was an entire symphony created to celebrate the 25th anniversary of Zelda, and it was so successful they continued to bring them back on tour. Millions of people around the world have fond experiences playing the games across the Legend of Zelda franchise, and the music has become so iconic, just hearing a little bit of the theme could bring back those memories. With Breath of the Wild being a smash hit, the Zelda franchise is not going to die anytime soon. And with that, I think we could give thanks to the one thing that's guaranteed to bring us back to those days in front of a TV with a controller in our hands: the music. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and feel free to follow me on Twitter. I would love to keep making these kinds of videos. Games and music have been both just undying passions of mine, and I would love to continue sharing it with you. I'm Andrew Luke, and I'll see you all in the next episode. Bye!